tell you a little bit more about myself and Western Hard Chrome. I am a mechanical engineer by training, but hopefully you won't hold that against me. Never truly applied my engineering training in anything sort of in terms of classical engineering work. Starting out of university, I began in the oil and gas industry working for Schlumberger and working on the field, getting my hands dirty. Then moved to the manufacturing company where I did research and development, quality, and those sorts of things. And then the last little bit that I had with the Streamflow group of companies was implementing SAP. And anybody that's worked in that knows that that can be quite a challenging endeavor. So we implemented that for a group of companies. And then after that, I felt like I needed a little bit of a change and getting out and trying to run a business on my own. So that's how I ended up at Western Hard Chrome as a general manager. So Western Hard Chrome is primarily a repair facility, so it's different than some of the ones that you've talked to, some of the folks that have talked here today. We're essentially doing industrial coatings, so hard chroming, thermal sprays, electroless nickel, and then we grind and polish those coatings to repair products for the oil and gas, mining, and utilities industries in Alberta and the provinces around it. 99% of our work is sort of small, custom, job shop type work, right? When I came into Western Hard Chrome, I'd met with the owner and really liked what I was hearing and the support that I was felt that I would get when I got there. Certainly, I did find that a family-owned business, they've been operating in Edmonton, effectively unchanged since the 1980s. We had an experienced workforce, as many of you talked about here today. You've got long-term employees. We had a great reputation that had spanned decades, but we're really struggling from trying to recover from the COVID hangover and to meet our customers' needs in sort of an increasingly compliance and document-driven world. I'm sure most of you can agree with that. We couldn't seem to get back to our customers in a timely fashion, so we talk about poor customer service response there. It was hard for us to be able to give a straight answer to anybody. And a lot of our customers, when we talked to them, felt like we were ignoring them. We were hiding from them in a lot of ways. And then looking at it, clunky data from the production floor, all of our production data, so you can see here, that's a copy of our old paper work order that we had. Keeping track of data on the shop floor was extremely difficult. Everybody had the piece of paper that got passed around through the shop and everybody wrote their numbers on it. And then when they made an error, they crossed it out, and then you couldn't tell who was writing it down or who wasn't. That was also the sheet of paper that had the carbon copy attached to it, so you could do your pricing on it. So if you look at some of these examples, you'll see numbers over top of numbers. It was also where we tried to keep track of our non-conformances when they were happening. So super challenging to try and understand what was happening at the shop floor level. And then trying to communicate that to customers, of course, was also a challenge, right? What that ultimately meant was that as an organization, our results were declining and our profits and revenue were dropping off.
Just to paint the picture, this is early 2023, and then we adopted Steelhead. What time frame roughly was it? January of 24?
I think we were fully up and running in March. We started our work in January and we were fully up and running in March of 2024. It took a while for us to kind of convince ourselves, even though I had come from an industry where we had ERPs in place, that we needed to have some sort of a system there. Drew and I talked a lot about single source of truth. That was a big thing that we had when I was working in the other company, and it spoke to me. We needed a place to pull all that information together so that we were all talking about things the same way. And so, like I say, from my perspective as somebody new coming into the organization, and I'd spent this time, I was struggling in that first 6 or 8 months that I was there to try and understand what was going on, right? As an engineer, I loved data, I wanted that data, but you just couldn't get it in a timely fashion. So I was struggling to understand the business, how to make things better. And while I had the experience running SAP, and I knew that that wasn't the right choice for us, I knew that we needed to have an integrated system that was better for our business, right? So we wanted that single source of truth. We wanted to be able to pull that information together. We needed that real-time visibility. And as you could see, the paper copies would come into the office, and then somebody would get around to entering the data either into accounting or into a spreadsheet. so that you could try and look at what had happened in the previous month or two. We needed to up our customer service game, as we talked about. If we're not satisfying the customers, you start losing, and then it becomes a snowball where people are leaving and you're not getting the outcomes you need for your customers, right? We wanted data. We wanted to be able to look at what was happening in our business and be able to make some decisions based on that to actually make improvements. So we really wanted help, and that's where Steelhead came in. So we did, some of you talked about it before, the, sort of looking around on Google, trying to find somebody that could help us out. And we were fortunate enough to come into contact with Steelhead and get going on what we were doing, right?
What we're going to follow along with through the next few slides here is just what the Steelhead tool brings as far as data, how Western Hardchrome has utilized it, and the picture that we really want to paint for the audience, what's often misconceived from our experience at Steelhead, is that the system will do this for you. And that's not necessarily true. We can have the best tool, the best system in the world, but what it requires is a captain to steer the ship. And we think that Glenn and Western Hardchrome has navigated the course quite well. So that's what we're going to illustrate here from Q2 of 24. So we implemented Steelhead in March, and we're going to fast forward, compare those results from Q2 of 24 to Q2 of 25.
As a key part of any business, fundamental to everybody really is profit growth and cost control, right? It's important. These are important elements to making the business successful. So there were several key elements that I wanted to understand but weren't immediately apparent to me when I was looking at what we were doing in the paper world, right? And so we, as a small business, a couple of key things we were looking at, we had lots of long-term customers, right? We'd done business in Edmonton we're into our 64th year now. We'd had lots of customers that we'd worked with for decades, which was great. But we were essentially taking every bit of work that they had, right? Anything that they would ask us to do. And so my initial mindset as coming into this was, I need the revenue. I want to bring that in regardless of what's going on with it, right? But we couldn't easily see whether we were making money on these jobs or not. You had a good sort of, like we say, gut feel about what was going on, but you didn't have the data to support a decision that you were going to make, right? We had little visibility of the costs that were being generated, right? So many of you have kind of talked about that already, is how do you know where your money's going? What are you spending it on? Especially on ours, so much of ours is driven off of labor. If you couldn't tell who was doing what and how long it was taking, you didn't know exactly whether you were making good choices about who was doing the work in the shop. And then on the data gathering side, if you got crappy input, you get crappy output, right? So the data gathering, the entry, the analysis, everything that we had was so prone to error, data entry errors, different things like that. The guy's not recording time. Somebody had mentioned that you don't record it in, when it's actually happening. You don't have a timer running. You've got, I forgot to write that down, and that job was a week ago now. What did I actually do on that job? So you had a lot of lag in things and a lot of error, right? So it was making it challenging to make any kind of actual decisions about what it was. So wanted to look at a way, how could we do a better job of deciding what we wanted to turn away and what we wanted to keep in terms of jobs? So those are some of the key things that went into that, right? So, looking at the jobs that we take, looking at what the margins are, those are sort of the things that we wanted to achieve, right?
One thing that I want to point out for the audience that I noticed while working with Western Hardchrome is Glenn and crew would actually review the margin on every single job that went through their shop. And if it was not ideal, they would investigate why, like nearly immediately, not a month later, not a week later, maybe that day, the next day, within a couple of days of completing that job, they would investigate the bad margin jobs. And one thing that I want to ask you, Glenn, for the audience here is how you mentioned having these customers that you maybe have done work for decades, and how difficult was it to increase the price or maybe turn away some of that revenue. As a small shop, you would hate to turn away revenue, but if it's truly the bad apple, How difficult is that to do when it's been such a long-term customer?
It's very difficult. It's a very difficult conversation to have internally because you've supported these people for a long time. And it's still a lesson that we're learning today. Our numbers, you can see, we have seen improvement. So we're talking about, say, our typical margin at the time was, say, about 25%, and we're up to the 35% now. But there's still definitely space there to grow, right? But it's certainly a difficult discussion to have and a decision to make. But with the data that you're getting from the system, it makes it way more obvious to us that what are losers and what are winners, right? So, and that's really the key for this as well, right? And there's fluctuations that happen here too. So, but overall, we've seen that. We've seen an increase in our margins there, and that is tied, how we're working in some of the slides that are coming up, but also just being more choosy in the work that we pick, right? And going after the ones that are actually in our wheelhouse, right?
So then naturally we're going to dive in, not only in margin here, but in the following consecutive couple of slides to come, how we achieved this increase in net margin. Mm-hmm. What other statistics other than margin have we been improving that we should also feel an increase in revenue or net margin in the future?
And like I say, looking at our costs in real time, being able to make transitions in people on the shop floor or like technicians that are working on jobs or processes that we're doing. So as we said, hard chrome shop, primarily hard chrome shop, but with thermal spray capability, a lot more control over our product output with the thermal sprays. So some of this is driven by saying to customers, hey, we know your part's always challenging for us. We have lots of reworks on it. Can we switch to a different process? That helps us and it helps them win too, right? So the next thing up, talking about quality and efficiency on the shop floor. So a couple of the challenges that we were talking about there, what was actually driving our quality issues that we were having, right? We knew that we were having non-conformances, but a lot of that stuff was it wasn't documented. It was dealt with more on the fly. You had no long-term data to actually understand what was causing the problem and how to make changes. And then, looking at our labor, right? As you saw when we're doing it in paper, how do you actually judge who's doing the better jobs, right? Who's actually performing higher or lower than other folks, and how do you deal with that, right? So when I first started there and when we were having the discussions with Steelhead, we'd been struggling with trying to meet the evolving needs of our customers. So we touched on that a little bit before, but we were really stuck in a rut. We had great long tenured employees that had done things a certain way, but there wasn't the documentation that went along with that. And a lot of it, what we're finding even today, a lot of that success that we were having as a business heavily relied on the customer relationships that we built up over decades. And we got a lot of customers that would say, oh, it's good enough, we'll take it. We never got that feedback as an organization. So again, you're not filling that plan, do, check, act kind of cycle that you'd want to see in an improvement cycle for a business, right? So now, today, what we have is as people retire, you get the new, younger, compliance-driven engineer or project manager that you're working with for the business that isn't willing to make a concession, right? And that's really forced our hand to look internally and see how we can make improvements, right? So, so a couple of things that we've been doing here, we knew we needed to up our game in capturing and rectifying issues, certainly before they became a customer's problem. We also needed a way to assess our people's performance, right? So with Steelhead, we now have the ability to, everybody on the shop floor can stop a job, which has been huge. We talk about engagement with the shop floor, that empowerment for people to be able to say, let's stop, let's fix what we're seeing a problem, let's make it better, has been really big, right? And it allows us that time we need to engage our quality team and help to make things better. Now we write up issues that we see within minutes of them happening. We can create non-conformances, we can define a disposition for a product, and get a plan rolling within minutes of it being identified. And the big thing for me, from a quality, sort of the quality background, is being able to look at that trend of data, right? What's been causing our problem, and how do we look at where we can put some continuous improvement horsepower into things and make jobs better, make our product better, make our output better for our customers, right? The other thing we are able to do now too, which we weren't able to do before, is look at the data for real-time and historical analysis of labor, right? So now on a weekly basis, I can look at every member of our team and see how they're doing in terms of productive versus non-productive time, right? And that was that had never happened before. So the information for the labor hours comes from the timers, the timer dashboard. So everybody that we have in our system, every job that's going through, they're punching in and punching out as they accept jobs and pass them on to the next stage. There's a timer running. So there's a rudimentary sort of analysis that's done in Steelhead with regard to sort of everybody's basically working on an 8-hour day, so we get that kind of gross percentage of labor efficiency. And then I take it a step further and I pull information from our payroll system and take it that way to get a more accurate presentation. But it's actually very close for the most part, because not a lot of people are going beyond that 8-hour day anyway for our shop.
Glenn gave me one very good tidbit for those in the audience that don't track the 3 key things. You can't fake all 3, and that's clocked in time, billable hours, and throughput. You can fool 2 of the 3, but you can't fool all 3. Mm-hmm. That's a line from Glenn next to me. And that holds true, and it's a very interesting thing to look at when we're looking at production, is that you can fool your throughput, but you can't fool all 3 of those things.
So now when we have that data, our leadership team can have those conversations one-on-one with our shop floor folks and say, hey, your numbers are lagging behind the other folks in your department. What's going on? Is it something where more training's required, or they're not the right fit for a particular machine that we think we've put them on, right? There's that opportunity for us to engage with the employee and try and make them, fit a little bit better, do training if necessary. And then if need be, that's also an avenue and some backup to go into progressive discipline if it turns out that somebody's knowingly doing something incorrect, right? Fortunately, we don't come across those problems too often, but it is something that's there. And now you have that data in your hands to be able to make those changes and have that to back you up, right? So again, touching on the outcomes here. So our time on hold, as you can see, is a huge decrease. The improvement time has been huge, right? So in the paper system, we weren't really tracking that at all, but even now from Q2 24 to Q2 25, the time it takes us now with everybody understanding the system better and knowing how to function has really decreased for us, and that's great for getting stuff back on the shop floor if we do make a mistake and need to get it turned around. Our rework work orders, so every job that we have that we find non-conforming that has to go back through gets a rework work order created for it. That's been a 23% decrease. So we're also seeing less errors. So I mean, that's tied to just, again, people understanding the processes that are in the system a little bit better now that it's more defined, and being able to execute on things a bit better. And overall, our rework cost has dropped by about 8%. It's not exactly where we want it to be just yet when we're talking about absolute values, but we are moving in the right direction, which is huge for us and huge for our customers. Customer service is a big key to things as well. So it's sort of the final pillar in the things we'll talk about here today. Our customers really were telling us we were horrible. We couldn't do a great job of keeping them up to date on a job and getting the customers what they needed to know when they needed it. We're really struggling with that, right? And a lot of that, I think, was tied to just our team not being confident in what was going on in the job at any one time, right? They couldn't tell what was pending, what status it was. So when our team was unsure about the answer, their default position was just not saying anything, right? And that's just not a great formula for success in any business, of course. And what it ultimately led to is dragging out conversations. So we talk about lengthy communication trails or escalation to me or to our president, right? The phone calls from the long-term customer that says, what the heck are you guys doing, right? So that kind of escalation is not what anybody wanted to see. So what we needed to try and get at there was, like we talked about in a lot of these things, having that live status on the jobs was huge, right? So now everybody on our leadership team is able to see the status of any job that we've got going on, whether that's through work boards or whether that's through the watchtower. Those are huge functionalities for us. Our guys in the production side deal with that every day. That helps them plan out their day in terms of what's going to be happening on the shop floor, who's going to be working on what. That visibility has been a huge boon for our production management folks. And now also when a customer calls, it's very easy for us to be able to say what the status of a job is, or if it's on hold, right? We can give them that information. For me, for myself, even as somebody that's not necessarily out on the shop floor every day, if a customer does happen to phone me, or if I'm out visiting them, I can pull that information up and I can tell them what's going on with their job immediately, right? Or show them that as an example of how we can better support their business, right?
It's an incredible turnaround in the on-time delivery and dock time. What do you think, from your perspective, or from your customer's perspective rather, like what is the decreased response time? Like, so a customer used to call you, did it used to be an hour until they got a status on a job, and now it's 10 minutes? Or like, what do those actually look like at Western Hardchrome today versus last year?
I would say you're probably right. It would be something like when they originally would call, if we actually got back to them, which is bad to say. But if we did that, we'd be talking about, say, 3 hours, right? The guys would have to go out to the shop floor, they would talk to somebody on the shop floor, or they would have to talk to a couple different folks to know what was going on. And then they would get sidetracked with something else because somebody else would talk to them. And so that spiraled to the point where you weren't getting any response to the customer, or very, very slow, right? So like I say, now the guys can pull it up on Steelhead. They're on the same device as they're looking it up. They can give a response to the person as soon as they want, right?
Without hanging up the phone.
Without hanging up the phone, right? The other thing that's been big for us is the use of the customer portal, right? So now all of our key customers, I don't know how many of you are using it in your Steelhead worlds, but that's been big for us. Every key customer, we haven't opened it up to everybody yet because some of our customers are quite small. It really isn't relevant to them. But now our customers, the ones that are tech savvy or just shy about calling us, can get all their information all in one shot without ever having to actually talk to us, right? So, and the other sort of benefit to that is it keeps our own team honest, because now they know that the customers are seeing that data. So anytime we thought we might want to shine somebody on about something, guess what? They can see that data too, right? So it helps to kind of, keep everybody on the same page, as it were. And as you can see, definitely decreased the response time. Our on-time delivery numbers have drastically improved. We had a target in our business of 85% on time is sort of a normal benchmark for people. We were historically always running about 45%. We've been now over the last, say 6 months, been running well over 85%, if not higher than that, right? And dock-to-dock time, so our internal processing time has dropped dramatically as well.
Just to recap, Glenn, with the transformation from Q2 of 24 to Q2 of 25, obviously we've done some significant measures in customer service quality and the margin departments. What is next for Western Hardchrome, and how do you want to continue down the path of continuous improvement?
The things that we want to see, that we want to continue to work on with you guys. Big one, three big ones for us: scheduling and capacity planning. Trying to better understand, so that means more data input from us, but a better understanding of what we actually can provide to a customer and when, right? So we're still at a certain stage where we know what's going on in the shop floor, but we don't have a good idea of what our capacity truly is. So once we have that piece in place, it's a lot easier to say to a customer, yes, we can give you a 4-day turnaround, because we know that those production areas aren't at full capacity yet, right? So that'll be a big one that we're already working with Steelhead on, and Drew and myself have been going through. Quote turnaround time, a couple folks already mentioned that. We've seen some new work that the Steelhead folks have done on RFQs. And I even just talking to a friend of mine that works in a different business, he's talking about how his sales team can't turn quotes around fast enough for their customers, and they lose. And it's just not what anybody wants to see. So the faster we can get a quote to a customer, for us, we're in a good position because we do have a lot of those long-term guys that just come to us, but we're trying to get new business and come in. So if we can respond to them quicker and give them a more defined answer about what's going on, it kind of ties to capacity planning. That's really what we want to see. And then the last one is kind of tying together with our work on labor efficiency, is to try and look at the volume of chrome or thermal spray that's removed per hour per grinder. So this is another one of these ways to further enhance our ability to assess productivity in our business that isn't driven by widgets out the door, right? So
that was one interesting point that I do want to touch on that Glenn has mastered as an engineering mind, is how do you normalize across your plant floor? Some parts are big, some parts are small. If you measure department A to department B, what if this department only produces big parts? They get they have less part throughput, but maybe their revenue is higher. Well, we got to find the statistic or the KPI that normalizes all production. And for Western Hard Chrome, that's what we found to be is cubic inches of material added or material removed, so that we can compare relatively equally operator A to operator B or department A to department B.
So that's it. I hope that we've given you some value here today. And yeah, if you got any questions.
So we're a batch operator. We don't have a line. And part of the challenges I've had trying to do the costing is that, one, I don't know where to put the fixed overhead on the process. And two, we have a blast room, right? So you have an operator. We load him with 1 hour's worth of work, which could be 3 jobs. So the timers are, sometimes they work, sometimes it's on a sheet of paper. We allocate a blast buddy to go in and help him and mind him, make sure he's okay, and help him move. Don't know where to allocate that. You know, when we're on the powder coat line, we could have 2-3 guys working a job for 15 minutes and then they go off and do something else. So the timers are kind of all over the place on an individual level. How did you, or do you have, anyone has any insight as how I can kind of look at that so I can get better margin numbers?
So for us, we're fortunate that we don't have lots of cases where we're running multiple timers at a time, so it's more linear that way for us, so it's a little easier. So I don't have a good answer for sort of how to do that. What we've done based on the amount of like now that we have a better handle on our productive labor, we've established a more accurate labor rate that we have within the system. So that's how we've dealt with it. So we look at, and that's how we baked in our fixed cost as well into that labor rate that we're running in the shop. So, and then it's just a matter of looking at the jobs that we've got going through and where we're exceeding, like as we look at that margin, where's our labor exceeding what our expectations were per job, right? So that analysis is happening as we're looking through every job. Fortunately, we'll have 100 work orders on the shop floor at any given time, so it's not an overly onerous way of doing it, but we can see that in a snapshot of going through the jobs that are working on the shop floor to see where we maybe have to make some adjustments.
Just one tidbit is we could either do within Steelhead what we call station costing, where operators that are working in a particular booth could clock into a station. That way their time is split or allocated across the jobs that are in one station, even if there's multiple. Or if we don't utilize racking and we're a batch operation, maybe look into utilizing racking.
Okay, so talking about the timer, I'm curious that when you release a new job to the floor, you have a traveler or job card with say, specified operations. So when you measure the efficiency, do you have a planned time for each operation? So you can see the operator, how long they spend booked there, or it's kind of experience from the management. So how you set up the standard, put it in Steelhead, then measure the actual performance.
on when we cost the job in the first place, we actually break that down by operation. So we've got the hours and then the labor, so then that's how the calculation of the cost gets done. So we give an allocation of time. If there's that works well for jobs where it's relatively the same kind of product that we have. If it's something that's different that we have maybe not done before, then that's where we'll engage the shop floor and we'll actually talk to them about what they think it's going to take. So that one is a little bit of a shot in the dark in the first place, right? But you get a good sense of whether you're accurate or not fairly quickly when you do that, right?
The feedback loop is critical, certainly, of the price versus cost or estimated versus actual.
How did Steelhead help your on-time delivery? It was a pretty significant increase.
I think the big thing for us from that was the visibility of what was going on. When we were doing it before and not being able to, part of it was we knew what was going on the shop floor. So if we had something that was lagging behind, we could move stuff ahead. And then also that visibility helps us, even though we're not fully where we want to be with scheduling and capacity planning, we can also say now with more confidence that, hey, customer, I know you want a 10-day turnaround, but we need to give you a 12. So that helps, obviously, right? Because you can be more accurate in hitting your dates, right? So that's where we've seen some of those improvements.
A round of applause for Glenn and Drew.